Hello everyone and everywhere that ever was or will be, I'm Redrunner, and I'd like to thank you for joining me for my latest and greatest list of my top 10 death battles I want to see. This video has been a long time coming, and there'll be plenty of new stuff compared to the last top 10s. If we share the same ideas, that's great, and even if we don't, I hope I can teach you something new. But in any case, we have a whole lot to get through this time around, so without further ado, let's jump right in. Number 10.
Ninten right. I want to wrap this show up before the cavalry arrives.
The Devil May Cry series has its fair share of forays into death battle, with Dante and Virgil both partaking, and while Virgil may have gotten skewered by Sephi over there, I wonder if it's possible for his son Nero to follow in Dante's footsteps and secure a win. Without further ado, let's see who Nero will face. Nero versus Hellboy. Delsin Row was simply a guilty pleasure fight I've considered for Nero in the past. It's nothing special. Mondo Zappa is a match a friend of mine likes, and has decent enough connections, but not enough to net a spot. Noctis is definitely the number 2 for Nero's opponents, and is honestly probably his fairest fight, but lacks in the endearing connections for me that Nero vs. Hellboy has. Nero vs. Hellboy is a battle between demon hunters who just so happen to be part demon. They both have used the same combo of revolver, sword, and a powerful right hook. They both also get some type of super form. Now, while it's easy to simply scale Nero to what has already been shown for the series on Death Battle, I don't think that's giving them enough credit. Devil May Cry is a lot more powerful than you might imagine, and the 5th entry in the series only solidified that. Nero undoubtedly scales to Dante and Virgil by the end of the 5th game, and those two are insane. The raindrop feat sounds impressive, but neither time Death Battle mentioned it did they give a concrete number on how fast it was. However, there is simpler scaling, such as to lightning attacks in the series, or even some lasers that exist, which could put the Devil Hunters anywhere between massively hypersonic to just around the speed of light. To jump over to compare Hellboy, he has also dodged lightning and a few lasers of his own. Unfortunately, it's harder to get a concrete number since this only happened in comic panels, but it could get him at least to relativistic speeds as well. On the note of power, in the Devil May Cry anime, the demon Abigail created a massive portal that eclipsed a large portion of the planet and might have parted the clouds below it. Dante then proceeded to defeat Abigail without even utilizing his Devil Trigger, and later in DMC2, nearly effortlessly defeated Argisax, who is said to be equal to both Abigail and Mundus. Argisax himself was capable of accelerating the movement of the moon to cause a solar eclipse, and Dante only kept improving, getting a massive power boost by the end of Devil May Cry 5. Why am I talking about Dante so much in a Nero analysis? 'Cause Dante just so happens to be the backbone of everything in these games. This ultimately amounts to the Sons of Sparta, Nero included, being safely in the continent-busting ranges, potentially even into planet-busting. Hellboy can still somewhat match this, actually, as he's able to tank hits powerful enough to completely wipe out the surface of the planet without even entering his full demon form. And when Hellboy enters his kaiju form, yes, he has one, he has enough area of effect to completely ignite an entire mountain range. Before I move on to equipment, I do just have to mention that there are relatively solid arguments for Devil May Cry characters being on a universal level of power, and yes, I do personally believe them. As they're contentious, I'll simply leave a link to the list of feats, and continue on under the assumption that these two are equal in power instead. But even with that added detail, I don't believe Hellboy can realistically take down Nero, given his expansive arsenal. Not only does Nero have his go-to Red Queen and Blue Rose, which are powerful in their own right, but in Devil May Cry 5, he gained access to his Devil Breaker arms, mechanical arms that give him special abilities. Some of these are simply propulsion or lightning blasts, but the most notable is Ragtime, which can create bubbles of time, slowing down anything caught in them. And if Nero sacrifices the arm, he can completely stop enemies in time for a short period. The only notable equipment that gives Hellboy an edge is his right hand of doom, which is completely and totally indestructible. But given their likely comparable speed and Nero's time abilities on top of it, it'd be more than possible for Nero to get around the arm and land a fatal blow. I went on longer than I thought I would on just the first fight, so we can see how this video's gonna go. In any case, let's move on to the next entry. Number 9.
The girl is a curse. She came from nowhere. She is no one.
Horizon Zero Dawn, and I suppose Forbidden West soon too, aren't necessarily games that I think many people would expect in Death Battle, but I feel there's more under the surface than people give credit to, and at least one matchup that I think is worth happening. So why don't we check that out now? Aloy vs. Nariko. Horizon vs. Heavenly Sword. Breath of the Wild Link is frankly a complete stomp in favor of Link. The only good comparisons between the two are in their game, not their characters as well. Lara Croft already had her best match, and Aloy can do better thematically. Takara is probably the character that matches Aloy the most in style, and might just be the closest fight. I simply don't have interest in it. For me, Aloy vs. Nariko hits the best marks. Both are PlayStation characters who were born into a people that largely view them as a curse. Aloy was made an outcast from her tribe because of her uncertain birth from the mountain, while Nariko was shunned amongst her people because she was not born as the prophesied son to the chief. Both embarked on a journey to find their destiny, and in the process earned the respect and admiration of their people. On top of that, and the obvious visual similarities, their settings are quite alike in my opinion as well, with the ancient, tribalistic time period, with tech more advanced than the setting seems to allow. On the surface, yes, Nariko looks, and almost definitely is, more impressive in a straight-up fight, as she's more nimble, acrobatic, and frankly just has a bigger sword than Aloy. However, Aloy makes up for that in her own strategy and ingenuity, which are the cornerstones of her character. Both were trained to be warriors by their fathers, though where Nariko has a very head-first approach, wielding the heavenly sword, Aloy has a vast array of tools and traps at her disposal that can catch Nariko off guard. Nariko is strong enough to fling around grown men with relative ease, though Aloy is nothing to scoff at either, as she can tear off massive chunks of armor from the machine she fights with nothing but a spear. Aloy is tough enough to tank direct hits from machines big enough to effortlessly obliterate boulders, but Nariko can survive hits from Roach, who completely shattered the entire stadium floor they were fighting on with a single blow. Both are capable of dodging arrows, and Aloy can even see bullets in slow motion with concentration. Nariko does have a statement of having lightning-fast attacks, which could be backed up by her battles with Flying Fox, who can disappear from sight in an instant and appear in 2 places at once. Though, the movie adaptation of the story seems to imply through presentation that these are attributed to special abilities of his rather than pure speed. Aloy has similarly dubious lightning and even light speed feats via the machines she fights regularly, who have electric and laser attacks. For the sake of this fight, I'll stick with the on-average sonic speed reactions, as they're much more solid. Using these stats, Aloy would get higher than Nariko in speed, and about on par in toughness and strength. However, Nariko does have one ace in the hole: the Heavenly Sword itself. It saps the life force of any who wield it or are struck by it. Yes, even including herself. But by quite literally negotiating with the sword itself while on her deathbed, she was able to convince it to give her a final stand, granting her incredible power. This last resort would ultimately result in her death, but it's a nearly guaranteed victory for her in a death battle sense, as Aloy cannot defeat or notably damage Nariko in this mode. Despite the definitive result that Nariko's heavenly state grants this fight, I still find the concept and evenness of their fight before the buff very endearing, so that's why it got here on the list, but I've rambled enough. How about we move on to the next one? Number 8.
There is no
Evil here, only change.
System Shock is a sadly forgotten classic in the survival horror genre, despite it having paved the way for so many games to come, and at the center of that is one of the most intimidating antagonists of her era, Shodan. Technically, it's pronounced Shodan, but Shodan sounds cool. I digress. If this megalomaniacal AI entered into death battle, who could she fight? Let's see. Shodan versus Zana. Technically, it's pronounced Xana, but Zana sounds wait. HAL 9000 is undoubtedly the inspiration for most, if not all, the other AIs here, but doesn't have any real destructive capability or defenses against incoming cyber attacks that we can tell. GLaDOS was directly inspired by Shodan, and is more reasonable, but GLaDOS similarly lacks any real firepower to combat Shodan. The most interesting thing about that fight would simply be its banter. The Master Control program was admittedly a spot filler, and I have no interest in it actually being in death battle. This fight is a bit of a doozy, but I'll break it down to the best of my ability. Similarly to Ultron versus Sigma, these two are both completely artificial beings, and the battle only has a small amount to do with physical stats. On top of that, in this case, neither really has a main body they inhabit. We'd either take Zana at the point in Code Lyoko where he was spread across every computer network on the globe, or, to be more fair, when he was in a secluded warehouse. Shodan would more than likely be aboard the Von Braun for this fight as well, as it was her most recent dwelling, and the other option is a bit complicated. On that note, distance between the two is a notable factor, as Zana will be working from Earth, and Shodan will be in space. Shodan would need to be close to Earth in order to sniff out where Zana is hiding in the first place, which would put both of them in hackable range, as Zana has managed to hack into satellites before. Zana has gained access to highly destructive weapons of the world in the past, and he could easily use those to damage or destroy the Von Braun if given the chance. The Von Braun would also function very well as a makeshift battering ram, which Zana has no timely way to stop before it impacts the warehouse. This is where the interesting bit comes in that sets these two far apart from the likes of HAL and GLaDOS, the faster-than-light engine and Return to the Past protocol. The faster-than-light engine is genuinely not what you'd think. It uses reality-bending technology to quite literally change the laws of physics surrounding the Von Braun, allowing it to move faster than light. Shodan can hack into these systems to literally warp reality to her whim, outside of just the faster-than-light thing. And the longer the engines run, the farther its effects spread, theoretically spreading infinitely if not stopped, though the process is admittedly very gradual. Return to the Past looks simple on the surface, but also has strange properties to it. On the surface, Return to the Past simply rewinds time by up to 48 hours, but the actuality of it is much more ridiculous. See, Zana actually shifts every atom in the universe to how it approximately was, which, suffice it to say, is a lot more impressive than simple time reversal. This is a reason why Return to the Past is incapable of bringing people back from the dead. This means that both Shodan and Zana have reality warping capabilities with potentially universal range. Even if Zana's is seemingly more limited in use, that singular use is very helpful to him in this case, and Return to the Past is much more potent in its effects. And to put a bow onto this all, discounting these clashing forms of reality warping, Shodan doesn't exactly have a good track record with hacking, as it was both the cause of her behavioral malfunction in the first place and the way she was defeated in the first game. Her creation, the Many, was able to hack the Von Braun's AI Xerxes, despite the Many being biological rather than technological. So it's reasonable to say that she could accomplish the same, but Zana was made for hacking, and has shown supernatural efficiency with it in the past. All this to say, Zana would win in a hack-off, and I believe would at worst be matched in physicality with Shodan, thanks to both of their reality-bending abilities. So all in all, I believe Zana would win this fight. Zana just has all the tools he needs to take the win. Anyway, let's move on to a more conventional fight again. Number 7.
Why risk your life for those who will persecute you later?
If the world chooses to become my enemy, I will fight like I always have.
Death Battle has not been kind to Shadow. Considering they claim that they were using Archie-Sonic in a composite Mario vs. Sonic, Shadow reasonably should have been able to beat Vegeta at the time of that battle. And when he fought Mewtwo, his super form undoubtedly eclipsed both of Mewtwo's Mega Evolutions, to the point where, in my opinion, it's more likely for Shadow to just run in and kill Mewtwo in one hit than for Mewtwo to successfully mess with Shadow's mind. Then there's character portrayal, which, to be fair, Sega is also guilty of, but I'd appreciate bringing Shadow back to what he actually is. He used to be more than the edgy asshole, and even Sonic 06 got that, believe it or not. He used to be selfless and determined, and respects and stands by his friends. I know, not here to harp on the characters themselves, so let me just stop there, and we'll see who he's fighting. Shadow the Hedgehog versus Vincent Valentine. Having him fight Wario would be super pointless and redundant, especially since there are better Sonic vs. Mario fights if you really want one. Base or Zero is somewhat interesting, but Zero would mostly be a repeat of Metal vs. Zero, and Base stands no chance in a fight against Shadow. Ryuko is the most bizarre because it's a popular match, and has a genuine chance at happening due to the researchers showing interest, but it could be argued as even less fair for Shadow's opponent than Base. Ryuko just can't stack up to Shadow in power or speed when it comes to base forms or super forms. The only way to make that fight fair is if you use her non-canon video game, so I'll pass on that. For those of you who might not know, Vincent is an optional character from Final Fantasy VII, and has yet to appear in the remake. Both Shadow and Vincent are viewed as edgelords from the outside, despite their kind-hearted and damaged natures on closer inspection. Both were experimented on in a lab, Shadow being created in a lab and being infused with chaos, and Vincent being killed, then resurrected in a lab, then being infused with chaos. Yes, both of them are literally laced with a power called chaos. They both started on their journeys due to the loss of a loved one, Maria in Shadow's case, Lucretia in Vincent's. Shadow initially set off for revenge for her death, and Vincent specifically swore revenge on Dr. Hojo. Both got their own spin-off shooting games, where they were the only ones who could stop a primordial entity tied to their past using their final transformations. In Shadow's case, Black Doom, in Vincent's, Omega. That's a lot in common, frankly speaking, and I could keep going into more obscure things. I didn't even mention how the past haunted both of them and how they each had to find a way to get over that. In any case, now it's time to start looking at their combat capability. Final Fantasy is another series I don't think Death Battle is given enough credit to, namely in the scaling to moves like Supernova. It is possible for the main cast to survive this hit, so they realistically should scale to it. This had put Vincent around Solar System levels of durability and power. Shadow is equal to Sonic in stats, I think that's a given, but he actually has two very distinct forms as opposed to Vincent, whose Chaos form we only know is stronger than he is normally. In base form, the Sonic cast has several feats that get them into the planetary ranges of power. The fully powered Space Colony Arc is capable of reportedly piercing stars in the Japanese dub of Adventure 2. Note, not destroy them. And Perfect Chaos should be comparable in power. On that note, Sonic, as of Generations, was capable of taking down Perfect Chaos in base by himself. Faster than light speeds are also fair game for the cast, though this actually isn't enough to best Final Fantasy VII, as they scale at minimum above the likes of Bahamut Fury, as Zack Fair was able to take it down on his own. That put the Final Fantasy VII cast far above faster than light speeds, but we're not out of the woods yet. Despite Vincent being much faster and more than strong enough to wipe out base form Shadow in one blow, Death Battle has a seemingly unwritten rule that they have mentioned in the past on the Death Battle cast, where a character must be considered using their strongest form, even when it's admittedly unrealistic. So even though Vincent could blitz base form Shadow, Shadow would still be allowed to access his super form, and once that happens, the tables turn. Super Shadow should be superior to Eggman's final Egg Blaster, which, to contrast to Supernova, was capable of decimating multiple star systems in an instant. Super Sonic was capable of racing from Mobius to a star cluster in Sonic Advance 3. Given the nearest star cluster to us is 153 light years away, and Sonic made the trip in seconds, this would make him easily hundreds of millions of times faster than light. fight. Shadow scaling to these two feats would allow him to outpace and overpower even Vincent's most powerful forms, giving him the win. But I think that's enough of that. I think I've had enough of space for a while. Number 6.
When I'm finished killing you, I think I'll rewind time, so I can do it again, and again, and again!
I just had to say it, didn't I? I mean, yes, I wrote it in the script, so I guess I did. The cowardly but conniving Dr. Nefarious from Ratchet & Clank is returning from my last list. And if you saw that one, you know exactly who he's fighting, so let's just drop the pretense and see this through. General Grievous versus Dr. Nefarious. Eggman is a total mismatch, as his higher level mechs make short work of Nefarious. Cortex is the opposite end of the spectrum, and both of their connections to Nefarious are lackluster to me. Doofenshmirtz is similarly underwhelming. All three have the shared connection of goofy evil scientists with an animal fighting them, but I think Nefarious deserves more respect than putting him against Doof. Anyway, yes, this fight was on my previous list, but to reiterate, these two are threatening yet cowardly generals of their own robotic armies. They are both at one point organic beings, but due to an accident that destroyed their bodies, were remade into cyborgs. Both aim to conquer entire galaxies, and you get an opposite in where Grievous resents droids while Nefarious wants everyone to become one. I brought this fight back not only as I think it deserves recognition, but also because it seems I was underestimating both of them. Thanks to Obi-Wan vs. Kakashi, we know definitively that Death Battle will use Legends content for Star Wars characters. So I'll be doing the same with Grievous here. This doesn't spell the end for Nefarious though, as I was massively downplaying him in my last video. To begin, Ratchet & Clank has interstellar flight and combat somewhat regularly, though the most notable instances would be in Tools of Destruction. In Todd, Ratchet is able to pilot Aphelion to and around a star, and even piloted her into a black hole, fighting space pirates the whole time. Needless to say, this would make Ratchet's reactions at the very least faster than light. On top of that, in the PS4 remake of the original Ratchet & Clank, Nefarious survives being in the core of the deplanetizer, which, by definition, would be at least planet level. Though that story is non-canon, it's supported by Nefarious knocking out the Loki Master in one hit. The Loki Master used to call the planet of Taurinux its home, until the whole planet was blown to smithereens, with them on it. The fact that the Loki Master survived that, but Nefarious was still able to damage it with a solid backhand, means that he not only scales with weaponry, but physically as well. According to Death Battle, Obi-Wan was capable of scaling with the Force to around planetary levels of power, and Grievous scales to him in nothing but pure physical strength, as he doesn't have the Force. Though it's unlikely Star Wars characters, even in Legends, properly get that high, with only a few exceptions, as several holes in the existing feats have been brought up since that Death Battle. In any case, Grievous did survive the blast that nearly collapsed the surface of a planet, can survive starship cannons, and the speed feat for Obi-Wan is still usable, which puts Grievous around light speed. With all this considered, coupled with Nefarious's ranged capabilities and varied arsenal, even with Legends, Nefarious still manages to hold his own against, and eventually best, General Grievous. Which is admittedly a shame, because it's hard to find Grievous a thematic victory. Nearly the only match left for him I believe he wins is Doc Ock, which, no offense, I think is just a silly matchup from the get-go. I needed to bring this fight back up regardless, since there were several new things I learned about both characters since the last time I talked about the fight. And yes, even with the new info making it a clear win for Nefarious, I still believe this is the best fight for both of them, as the connections are so plentiful. In any case, we can now move on to the next entry in our list. Number 5.
Are you sure this will work?
I have no idea!
The medic is the backbone of the Team Fortress team. Without him, the others would be lost. Even if he's a bit, unethical in his practices, he still proves time and time again to not only be a genius, but a killing machine. So who should this crazy German doctor fight in Death Battle? The Medic versus Edward Richtofen. I know a lot of you might have no idea who that is, but bear with me. Doc was just there to fill space, and there's the red versus blue connection, I guess? But it's dumb. Mercy and Moira are interesting. Mercy's typically who people think of to fight Medic, but Moira has more of a genuine connection and fighting chance against Medic. In both cases, though, the connections are minimal and rely a lot on TF2 and Overwatch's rivalry with each other. On the other hand, Edward Richtofen is actually one of the main characters of the Call of Duty Zombies games. Both him and Medic are doctors for their respective teams. Both are crazy German scientists with a knack for coming back from the dead. COD Zombies has more content for calculations than you might expect, and right off the bat, for those who do know the series, the summoning key will not really be considered for this, as it's kind of just overkill if it's applicable to the battle at all. There are also two versions of Richtofen. Ultimus, who is less prominent and lacks the key altogether, and Primus, who is the main version, so to speak. Simply using Ultimus would avoid the debate of whether to include the key, but Primus looks more similar to Medic, and he might not get the key anyway, so this is just a personal preference. To go over it very quickly, suffice it to say Death Battle did not give Scout and TF2 their full credit. First of all, Scout more than likely did survive those 3 rockets, as we saw their trajectory from their point of view. Medic would scale to this as well, and on top of that, Medic has some of the most useful gear out of all the mercenaries, including his patented Uber Charge, which he can use to make himself invulnerable for a brief period of time, and charges over time. In Man vs. Machine, he also gains an energy barrier capable of blocking nearly all incoming damage, and can vaporize hordes of robots if they're caught in it. Vaporization on this level could equate to energy equivalent to several dozen tons of TNT, and if you really wanted to, you could attempt to scale the Mercs to Marasmus, who's capable of summoning storms. The low end of this would likely be on par with Medic's Barrier, though take that scaling with a grain of salt. The best speed feat aside from Scout's Bonk is probably from Demo Man, who managed to outrun his own explosion in the Meet the Demo video. This would get him and the rest of the Mercs to around the speed of sound without any added stat boosts. Richtofen, on the other hand, is standing very near the epicenter of a blast caused by Samantha that sets off a chain reaction, destroying Nuketown. Even lowballing this feat, it'd mean his pure durability is at least on the higher ends of building level, and maybe even into city block. Richtofen and his team are capable of moving in tandem with bullets, judging by the distance moved in this clip. They'd be moving at subsonic speeds, but there's much more impressive stuff that might be applicable. Avogadro is a super notable boss, who manages to tank a nuke to the face in Black Ops 4, scoffing that even the most destructive weapons the team possesses would barely phase him. He's also kind of just made of electricity. The only way to put Richtofen's durability on that level is shaky scaling. Scaling to the lightning is much easier, and would get Richtofen much higher than Medic in speed. Lastly, it's worth noting that both have a weird relationship with death. Medic has tricked the devil, in that the devil can only drag him to hell when he owns a majority of Medic's soul. This deal was made while Medic was selling his own soul, but since then, he's acquired the other 8 mercenaries' souls, which, yes, means that none of the other mercs have their souls. In other words, the devil will literally just send Medic back until he owns the majority of the souls. And right now, the split is 7-2. So Medic essentially gets 3 lives before he loses the majority. Richtofen also has resurrection. He gets a single extra life in the middle of combat, and he can come back over time, seemingly as much as he needs, though I probably wouldn't use this in combat, as it seems to take several hours. And that's without mentioning their gear, but I've been rambling. So let's just say Ed has a lot more variety. I believe Medic's Barrier has enough power behind it to kill Richtofen, and the Medigun might even be capable of overloading his heart with a strategic Uber Charge, as has been shown. However, Richtofen's speed gives him an advantage in outmaneuvering Medic, and his higher-end weapons are undoubtedly capable of killing Medic as well, since Medic's weapon does not seem to scale to his own durability. So ultimately, even without the summoning key, I believe this fight should go to Richtofen. Oh boy, that was exhausting. But we aren't done yet, so let's move on. Number 4. This has been on 2 other lists by this point, so let's drop the pretense and get into it, shall we? Ruby Rose versus Maka Albarn. Two scythe-wielding schoolgirls on a team of fighters, taught at a school that teaches them how to weaponize their souls to defeat the monsters plaguing their worlds. This is obviously a match that is going to happen, without question. It's already been confirmed. So I think this will be the last time I talk about it here. Since my last top 10, we've now gotten Weiss in Death Battle, as well as Krona from Soul Eater. Weiss was a little while ago, so it might have become outdated, but Krona will be very useful to see how Death Battle perceives Soul Eater as a series. Last we saw, Death Battle calculated Weiss to be capable of exerting a force equivalent to over 230 tons of TNT against Cordovan's mech. Ruby would be equal to this level of power, and she herself even managed to knock the thing completely off its feet, as opposed to Weiss. Krona and Maka can scale to each other, and while their measurement of Krona's black blood bubble were using different units of measurement, calculations of that same feat, using Death Battle's own size estimates, get over 5 gigatons of TNT. Also, Ruby has several lightning dodging feats, and my attempt at calculating Ruby shattering the wall actually got similar speeds, though it was probably a lowball. However, on the flip side, Death Battle admitted that characters in Soul Eater have been capable of dodging lasers, so going purely off what Death Battle has stated for either series, it seems very clear who the winner would be. However, recent events in the Ruby series may have made it a little bit closer. Firstly, it's possible to argue that Ruby's Silver Eyes are lightspeed, as they are light-based. And Penny's lasers are also in contention for that as well. Not to say I believe either claim fully, but they do exist, as in Volume 7 we see Penny's laser refract off the crystallized tusk of a Goliath Grim. The lasers did propel her back in Volume 3, and given that fact, they likely are not made up of pure light. And the most recent calculable feat of power is from the current volume, Volume 8, Chapter 5 specifically, so spoiler warning. When Cinder blasts through Amity Coliseum, she damages one of its stabilizers, making it lose altitude. Penny, in response, takes it upon herself to hoist Amity up to an appropriate altitude to transmit its message. This was after Penny gained the Maiden powers, but Penny was able to lift it a significant distance before she even activated the powers, and Penny herself scales in stats to the rest of the cast through the Aesops and Team Ruby. Given the size of Amity and the distance traveled by Penny, this feat is worth over 7 megatons of TNT. So yeah, even with this feat, Soul Eater dwarfs Ruby in power, but it does show a solid upward trend. It's still possible that Death Battle argues Silver Eyes are usable on Black Blood, but they realistically shouldn't be. So yes, with everything considered and Death Battle's own calculations taken into account, Maka should very handedly beat Ruby, especially with the Soul Sleep. I talked about the Soul Sleep last time, but basically, Maka can just turn off Ruby's aura, along with all her motor function. Regardless, I'm confident in this answer, so let's move on. Number 3.
I'll show you how I trained. Oh, this doesn't count.
My Hero Academia has had a couple forays into Death Battle at this point, and Ochako is the next combatant I'd like to see. Uravity herself. Who could be a fitting opponent? Let's find out. Uraraka vs. Cat. My Hero Academia versus Gravity Rush / Gravity Days. Spider-Gwen and Nora just outright suck as matchups overall, in all honesty. Koichi works overall, and they both have gravity powers, but I just find the match more boring overall. Ochako and Cat are both good-hearted, gravity-manipulating superheroes. Both value others over themselves, and are, to be frank, romantically awkward. Both primarily fight with kicks and or hurling debris at their enemies, and both are a little bit airheaded at times. Gravity Rush as a series, I believe, should get more attention, as it's a great game with a very good main cast, but even from a debating sense, they're decently impressive. For these two, I think it's best to start off with their abilities. Ochako's quirk is zero gravity. Anything she touches, which can include herself, loses all pull gravity had on it. Upon release, anything her quirk was affecting regains its weight. She can use her powers to barrage people with projectiles, speed up her own movements, or prevent her opponents from touching the ground. Although extended use of her quirk causes nausea. Ochako also incorporated grappling hooks into her most recent hero costume, which aids her mobility even further. there. Kat, on the other hand, has quite the list. She is a gravity shifter, one of only 2 that we know of for sure in her world. She can not only nullify the effects of gravity with an area of effect around her, she can also shift gravity's orientation for herself and anyone around her, allowing her to walk on walls and literally fall into the sky. Kat is the definition of falling with style. She can use this ability not only for mobility, but her gravity kick uses it in an offensive capacity. Kat can also levitate objects and people and fling them without lifting a finger. She also has special abilities such as the Spiraling Claw, Gravity Typhoon, or the Mini Black Hole. Warning, this move is likely not comparable to a full-power black hole. She has Lunar and Jupiter gravity styles as well, changing her effective weight, and in Lunar's case, allowing her to use wormhole kicks. All of these powers are sourced from her weird space cat guardian, Dusty, who can teleport her out of danger, and she can fuse with to turn into a Panther mode, which grants her regeneration and boosted stats. Speaking of stats, let's begin with those, shall we? Death Battle recently did Zuko versus Todoroki, making explicit mention of his massive ice wall feat, while also simply not choosing to give any numbers for it. Luckily, other people in the community have already done calculations of it, which sit comfortably around an equivalent to 11 megatons of TNT. This likely wasn't his max output, but it's a good baseline for Class 1A, especially for Uraraka, who is clearly not as physically powerful as many of the others. She also should be capable of reacting to Kaminari's electricity, making her a pretty decent lightning timer. You could argue for Oyama's naval laser being additional scaling, but not only is the naval laser weird and whether it is light speed, but even if it was, the scaling would be questionable for the general members of 1A. Kat should be on a similar level of power, as she's able to go head-to-head with and eventually defeat Electricity, who can summon and control storms that spread as far as the eye can see, which, applying the average horizon distance, would amount to around 14 megatons of TNT, or city level. Appropriate, considering she's stated to have the power necessary to annihilate everything down below, referring to the cities around the World Pillar. On top of that, at the end of Gravity Rush 2, Kat attempts to sacrifice herself, turning herself into a singularity to put a stop to the darkness rising from below. During the epilogue chapter, Kat does come back as well, so we're not able to write it off. Even a singularity as small as a single atom would have the mass of a mountain, according to NASA. So this feat should very safely put Kat ahead in that regard. But more than that, Electricity, as the name might imply, is the personification of electricity itself, and even attacks with and moves as a streak of lightning. With Kat scaling to this level of speed as well, stats are looking decently close. And no, I'm not even going to bring up Gravity Rush's weird cosmology. There are so many pocket dimensions, alternate realities, gravity so strong it warps time and space, etc., that it'd just be a rabbit hole. However, one thing Ochako really can't keep up with is abilities. She has several techniques using her existing power, such as Meteor Storm or Zero Satellites, but both of those rely on hurling rubble, which Kat can handedly counter with her own stasis field, or in extreme cases, the mini black hole. Kat's control over gravity is frankly more impressive than Uraraka's, and if it came down to it, I think Kat's anti-gravity would simply overpower Ochako's zero gravity. This extremely limits Ochako's maneuverability, mostly just leaving her grappling hooks, and at that point, what's left? The only way for Uraraka to win is through being faster than her and using brute strength, which, as mentioned before, is not her greatest attribute. I will say, there is some scaling people are expecting Ochako to get in the coming chapters of the manga. I won't specifically disclose, but if she gets this scaling, it'll put her on a level Kat might not be able to physically reach anymore, and she'd rely on her singularity feat to pull the win. But for now, I very much believe that Kat wins, which is nice, because as I said, her game is underappreciated, and she herself is a rather endearing character. But anyway, we can now move on. Number 2.
We got trouble!
If you're a poor soul who genuinely is left guessing what this match might be, I envy your ignorant bliss. Because not only is McCree and Overwatch's scaling in general a hot mess, but so is his opponents. Either way, let's stop beating around the bush and just see who McCree's facing, shall we? Jesse McCree versus Aaron Black. Indy dies. Sniper, and or Spy, is just a silly attempt at making another Overwatch versus TF2 debate, as neither really have anything in common with McCree off of the surface level. And while Arthur Morgan is more fitting than them, he's also much below McCree in stats. Aaron versus McCree is just the logical fight for each of them. Stereotypical cowboy gunslingers amongst a large roster of disparate characters. Though the higher end of Mortal Kombat vastly outdoes the likes of the Overwatch cast, these two are relatively even in many ways. Firstly, there are a lot of feats in Overwatch that get them into the building busting ranges pretty safely. In the Archives event, as units are being dropped into the battlefield, they catch fire. Given the fact that they're made of metal, this would likely mean they're dropping at a speed of 3 kilometers per second. Applying kinetic energy to the size of the Aura 14 units gets a yield of 2.3 tons of TNT. Not to mention, in the 0 hour short, Genji manages to reflect a blast which subsequently vaporized the armor plating of this giant mech. Comparing the size of the hull to Tracer, the blast must have been equivalent to just under 5 tons of TNT at least. Lastly, it might be possible to measure Hammond's re-entry into the atmosphere. Given the size of his mech, and assuming a composition of titanium, and giving 50% hollowness, makes it come out to just under 20 tons of TNT. Unlike Overwatch, Mortal Kombat has several different levels of power for its characters, rather than just 2. But Aaron does have solid scaling arguments. He easily scales to 0.1 tons of TNT due to this stage transition, but more impressive is scaling him to the force of the Solnado through Noob Saibot. Using pulverization and determining the size of the crater it creates, gives us a very impressive yield of over 42 tons of TNT. For speed, let's start with Genji. McCree fought alongside him in Blackwatch, so they should be comparable in most regards. Genji is capable of reflecting the combined fire of 6 or 7 Bastions in normal gameplay modes. Comparing Bastion's turret to an M61 Vulcan means Genji is moving around Mach 150. To add consistency, in Soldier 76's animated short, he manages to outrun a grenade explosion to save a little girl. Given how far he was from the blast, and the singular frame of animation he had to make the move, he must have been moving around Mach 180. Aaron is much simpler, as people around his tier have been able to react to Raiden's lightning in the past. This has actually put him on a similar level of hypersonic speeds. Both characters have dubious scaling to light speed, with Kano's eye laser and Symmetra's photon projector. But not only do I question both and their validity, they would also cancel each other out to a degree, so I'll just leave it there. Last thing to discuss is skill and equipment, which Aaron has in spades, not only having 2 pistols, but also a rifle, sand bombs, explosives, and acid on his person. Both are comparable shots, as McCree is able to fan the hammer and accurately hit each and every one of his shots on the grenades he just thrown blindly, and Aaron can bounce his bullets accurately off of gold coins without even looking. As much as this was, I think it was worth it, and with all that information, Aaron ebbs out in power and gear, also having more experience as he kind of got his aging slowed down by magic. He may or may not be, but most definitely is, over 100, but that's a whole other story. McCree fought a valiant battle, and depending on what you scale, this might be the closest fight on the whole list in all honesty, though it's also the most convoluted, so apologies if it was long-winded. But as we're about to reach number 1, it's time to list off some honorable mentions that didn't make this list. Tifa Lockhart versus Makoto Nijima. I think this is the most thematic Final Fantasy versus Persona fight, but I not only already included Final Fantasy, but am admittedly daunted by tackling Persona scaling. Joker versus Giorno. Same reason, but twofold. I'm still daunted by Persona scaling, and Gold Experience Requiem is just its own beast entirely. Kenshi versus Kanan Jarrus. This genuinely would have been on the list if it weren't for both Mortal Kombat and Star Wars already being there. Wise, blind, psychic warriors. Sounds pretty cool to me. Invader Zim versus Crypto. While I think this is a very good matchup, I can't say I enjoy the characters quite enough to actually put it above anything in this top 10, or even the other honorable mentions. Reaper versus Noob Saibot. This is another Overwatch versus Mortal Kombat fight, but it's less fun to debate than Aaron versus McCree, so it got overshadowed. Ayano Aishi versus Jimmy Hopkins. As bizarre as this fight seems, a friend of mine convinced me that it just might be an interesting debate. But as Yandere Simulator is in such a strange state and Bully was so long ago, it didn't feel right adding it to the list. Cole McGrath versus Alex Mercer. As flip-floppity as I've been on this fight, after joining a debate server, I can safely say Cole very handedly beats Alex with his stats and abilities. And since it wasn't as interesting to debate anymore, it was cut. Azula versus Cinder. With the newest Ruby buffs, this fight is very, very close. But I already had a Ruby character on the list, so I passed on it for now. Underdog versus Crypto. This match suffered from a lack of new info to share, except possibly scaling Crypto higher into the DC lineup, which would allow him the victory. Steven Universe versus Star Butterfly. Saved this one for last so I could clear the air. While Steven has shown the better brute force feats and is genuinely faster than Star in my opinion, several things in the Star vs. series indicate her indeed having universal level power. From Omnitraxis Prime being a living time-space continuum, Toffee merging with all magic, and one of Star's ancestors quite literally blowing up a universe accidentally. So I'll accept my mistake on that end, and given that, Star should in fact win. Anyway, now we can wrap this whole video up. My number one most wanted death battle is Speedrunner Mario versus Big Rigs. Two unmatched speed demons who can break down reality by kicking it into reverse. While Speedrunner Mario has the more clear feats of his own, Big Rigs actually has a higher finite speed measure. Wait, this isn't the real number one? Why is it so good, though? Alright, anyway, yeah, let's get into the real number one. Jenny Wakeman versus Robot Boy. Yes, this fight topped out another list in a row, simply because I wanted to make sure the fight gets the recognition it deserves. Plus, this is another opportunity for me to correct a mistake I made in the last video. Basically, this is a battle between two teenage robots trying to live and learn to live like normal kids, though they make time to save the world from anything that threatens it. Both also boast massive arsenals, including missiles, lasers, saw blades, heat and freeze raids, basic appliances. Honestly, you name it, they probably have it. I went over a slightly more exhaustive list in my previous top 10, so you can go there if you want to hear about Arsenal in excruciating detail. First off, my calculations for their throwing arms is factually incorrect. See, once you exceed the speed of light, kinetic energy equations no longer work in measurement. Though, frankly, since I did the same calculation method for both of them, the comparison still holds up, with Jenny edging it out with her throwing force. But now it's time for new stuff. Both of them can scale in reactions to the speed at which they threw their stuff into the sun, which might actually boost Robot Boy ahead in speed, as while his got a lower yield, that was purely due to its lower weight. Secondly, upon impact with the sun, the Dragon Robot Boy threw exploded. If you take the sizes of the explosion and the sun very literally and scale it back to Ro himself, it would be moon-shattering in explosive yield. This could be backed up by the time he contained enough energy to grow himself to the size of the moon itself, though it was involuntary. Jenny, in turn, got her own share of new calculations, which, fittingly, is once again from the episode Teen Idol. Something tells me the writer of that episode really liked writing overpowered stuff for Jenny. I'm on to you, Bernie. At the very beginning of the episode, we see Jenny dragging an unnamed evil robot through space, who then exclaims,
"Let go of me, you insignificant little bot! How can I destroy the Earth from another galaxy?"
We can take this multiple ways. At most, they were currently in another galaxy, likely Andromeda, given its proximity. Or they could have just exited the Milky Way itself. In any case, we know factually they had at least traveled to another star system, as Jenny crash lands on an alien-inhabited planet. We also know Jenny made it back home before school the next day, and it's even implied that she made it back the same night, as she said she's late for dinner before departing in a hurry. That makes the time frame anywhere from, I'd say, a half hour to at most 12 hours, given the average start time for high school in the US is 8 p.m., and she'd still need time to recharge, as we've seen her do before. Using the largest time frame and the distance to the nearest solar system, 4.37 light years, that'd make Jenny over 3,000 times faster than light. Using the shortest time frame for that would make her literally over 75,000 times faster than light. Saying that they had successfully traveled to Andromeda, which is over 2.5 million light years away, makes the feat absurdly impressive, to say the least. So take this with a heap of salt. That'd make Jenny anywhere from 1.8 billion times faster than light to 44.5 billion times faster than light. Also, you know that pyramid that summoned the sun? Its power got channeled directly through Jenny, visibly shaking her. Given it took a toll on her body and lingered in her body before firing, it might be fair to scale its power to her durability. Given how quickly it's dragging the sun from its rightful spot, this could genuinely get Jenny to solar system levels of power. I still can't believe literally all of Jenny's best stuff comes from one episode, but regardless, even using the highest estimates you can for Ro, Jenny can still match and surpass him again. Whether you want to use the highest numbers for the two is up to you, but Jenny's consistent ability to outdo Robot Boy is uncanny. And with that, we wrap up the longest top 10 video of mine to date. For real, this video has been a lot of fun to put together, and I expanded my horizons even further than before, and I hope I helped you to do the same by putting this together. If you guys have your own matchups you'd like to see, let's all get together and discuss down in the comments. Obviously, I'm only scratching the surface of what there is out there. These are just the ones that interested me, and I'd be happy to hear from you guys. But with all that said, it's time I signed off. If you liked this video, I'd appreciate it if you dropped it a like. If you didn't, dislike it. And as always, I'll see all of you in the next video.